here with many esteemed leaders of the Jewish community to raise concerns about Republican gubernatorial candidate Carl Paladino. I'm joined by Assemblyman Hikind, City Councilmember Steve Levin, and many other community leaders who are here today with us. In times of economic crisis, it matters a great deal what political leaders and candidates say. Unfortunately, in these same times, some leaders choose the opposite path. In the name of populism, they exploit fear. Not only economic and political fears, but also racial and religious ones. They suggest, either explicitly or implicitly, that the problems society is facing are caused by Jews, or by African Americans, or by Muslims, or by lesbians and gays. As Jews, we have too often seen the very dangerous outcomes of this so-called populist leadership. We've seen angry rhetoric spill over into racism and anti-Semitism. So when we hear politicians use coded religious and racial language in an angry political attack couched in economic populism, we know we must speak up. Does Carl Paladino have the right to call the Orthodox Jewish Speaker of the New York State Assembly an Antichrist or a Hitler? Does Carl Paladino have the right to say he'd like to bring Shelley Silver to Attica with an opportunity for people in, as he says, those small towns along the thruway to have the opportunity to beat him up a little? Does Carl Paladino have the right to forward emails that portray the President and the First Lady, an African-American family, as a pimp and a prostitute, or to cast the administration as an African tribe, or to use the N-word? Of course he does. Thankfully, in this country, we protect freedom of speech. But we're here today because we believe that those comments, that attitude, that approach to inciting fear and anger and division, rather than working to bring people together in tough times, renders Carl Paladino totally unfit to be governor of this great and diverse state.
I gotta tell you, Paladino, you know, a lot of people might agree with some of the things that he advocates in terms of policy. You know, I'm sure I agree with some of it as well. But it is beyond the pale. It is beyond acceptable to use language that he has used to refer to a Jewish leader as a Hitler. Has Paladino read his history? Does he know what Hitler represents? Does he know that Hitler represents the final solution, the murder of 6 million men, women, and children? Does he realize that when he used that word, or he referred to Silver as the Antichrist? There's a long history of pogroms and anti-Semitism all over Eastern Europe relating to us Jews being the Antichrist. And a man running for the highest position in the state of New York uses that kind of language, approves of someone else using that kind of language. And a man running for the highest position in the state of New York uses that kind of language, approves of someone else using that kind of language. It is unconscionable. It is degrading. It is insulting. And this is the man running for the highest position for governor of the state of New York. I know that Mr. Paladino takes great pride, you know, that he is not ashamed of anything. You know, that itself is a tragedy, because everyone should have some shame sometimes. We all make mistakes. We all know how to apologize. And he should be ashamed of himself for his racist remarks. I'm not a great fan of the President of the United States at all. But racism is unacceptable, period. And this man indulges in racism. This man is dividing the people of the state of New York, upstate, downstate, the good, the bad, the ugly. What the hell is wrong with him? Is he out of his freaking mind? What is this going to accomplish at the end of the day? Is this how he wants to be successful? By getting the anger of people through hate? And the other violence that he preaches, maybe he's not going to do. He doesn't really mean it, that he's going to beat up on Shelley Silver. But you know what? There are a lot of people in this state who might take his advice and beat up on some member of the legislature. You want to beat up on me verbally? You want to say nasty things about me? Just don't call me Hitler. Just don't call me Antichrist. Because I take that to heart. I take that very personal, and every Jew and every New Yorker should feel the same way. I can understand frustration on the part of people. I understand that. But you can't cross the line. It is unacceptable.
Mr. Paladino is no longer at this point just a private citizen who is can say whatever he feels like off the cuff, however racist and hateful and hurtful it may be. Mr. Paladino is a candidate for governor of the state of New York. He bears a responsibility to be a leader, to be responsible in his words and actions. And instead, what he has done is he has appealed to racism, he has appealed to anti-Semitism, he has appealed to prejudice, and he has appealed to hatred. Mr. Paladino should be ashamed of himself. Whether he feels that shame is for him to decide, and that's between him and his God. But what he has done is in the worst tradition of public life in this country.
For someone to call anyone by the epithets that Mr. Paladino used to Sheldon is unforgivable. It shows either a total disregard for history, or perhaps even worse. As mentioned earlier, the terms Hitler, the terms Antichrist, are meant to incite. They are meant and have been used for generations to cause anti-Semitism, to cause people to attack Jews everywhere. And that is something which we cannot tolerate under any circumstance. This past Saturday was Yom Kippur. In the Yom Kippur service, one of the highest points is Yizkar, a remembrance of the people who passed through. In that service, there is a special prayer that's said for those who died, Al Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of the name of God. And in most versions today, it's specially inserted for those who died at the hands of the Nazis. For anyone to invoke that terminology and to demean it, demean their memory, is absolutely unacceptable. And it brings into strong question the suitability for being a public servant. Last evening, I received a number of phone calls and emails from various friends of mine who are involved with the Republican Party, saying that he didn't really mean it, I told them, all he has to do is issue an apology. Just issue a straightforward apology. I wouldn't pretend, I'm sure that this thing would just be forward. But instead of that, there was a statement, multiple statements, issued by his campaign manager. Look at the Huffington Post. It talks about how Mr. Paladino has a way of speaking in kitchen talk, and that it doesn't really matter. And if people can't tolerate his way of speaking, well, they better get used to it. But I say we can never get used to it. He also said that Mr. Paladino does not remember saying it. But I will say that we have to remember, we can never forget.
You know, in popular culture, the use of the word Nazi is sometimes used, and it seems to be increasing. There was a Seinfeld episode written about it, and sometimes people, when they think someone is being particularly strict or demanding, they'll say he's such a Nazi. Does this fall into that category, or do you think that this goes beyond it and actually into a something that's not jokey, but actually is insightful, as you said? It's inciting.
A couple of things. First, there's a big difference between street slang by some kid and the Republican candidate for governor of New York State. and the responsibility of political leaders and of candidates to be thoughtful about what their words mean to people is a serious obligation, and one that Mr. Paladino has taken on by making himself a candidate for governor. So when he chooses to make himself a statewide figure and then attack others with this insightful language, and what I said before, knowing full well that in times of economic crisis, political populism can incite far more than maybe what is intended. And so I think what Assemblyman Hikind said, this is whatever he may say. Well, of course I didn't mean that I was physically going to lead Speaker Silver up the thruway and take him into those, his words, small towns along the thruway for people to beat him up a little. At this moment, running a campaign that's about being mad as hell, that is something different than what young people might say on the street.
Let me just say that Mr. Paladino and his campaign manager, they take great pride in telling the public that Mr. Paladino says that he's not politically correct. I sort of like that. But that does not apply, and it's very interesting. He's not politically correct. That means whatever he says he really means. It's really coming from him. A lot of politicians are very careful what they say. We don't always know what's in their heart. We only know what they say to the public. But Mr. Paladino is different. He really tells you what he thinks. And when he calls Shelley Silver Hitler, Antichrist, he means it. And he does it seriously. He's a very serious man. And therefore, I think he is actually very dangerous. Now, I have maybe never, ever said this about any political figure. Never. That I believe that Paladino is dangerous, in spite of the fact that I might agree with him on some of the issues that he has raised. But the man is dangerous. He is dividing the people of this state. He's dividing communities. His speech is filled with hatred towards one group against another group. I mean, my God. I mean, we're not here, by the way, speaking, well, let's make this very clear. We're not here speaking for the entire Jewish community. Not even maybe half. I'm here speaking for myself, from my heart, from my soul. You'll find other people in the Jewish community, guaranteed. Somebody called my radio show and said, listen to this, and I think he's actually here. The guy actually said, I'd rather have an anti-Semite than someone who I disagree with family values. In other words, it's more important to me, gay marriage is more important to me, and abortion, so the guy's an anti-Semite. Big deal. Now that is pretty crazy thinking. Again, I'd rather have an anti-Semite admitting maybe he is an anti-Semite, but I agree with him on some of the social